Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the live video this evening. And thanks for bearing with me. I know we changed the times a couple of times. So it was originally going to be at 8, and then we changed it to 6, and then it went to 7, and we just sort of dodging the load shedding. So Tanner, I'm gonna add you to the stream. This evening we've got Tanner Coe. Thanks, Tanner, for joining.
How's Ryan? Thanks for having me.
So Tanner, thanks. So Tanner's from Gittins and Gittins Attorneys. You guys are based in Observatory, right?
Yes, we are.
Cool. Okay, so do you want to give a quick intro and sort of let our audience know what it is that you do exactly? And
all right. I'm an attorney here at Gittins Attorneys. We're a general practice firm. We do pretty much everything. I do mostly the litigation here at the firm, sort of all the sort of in court legal fighting that we need to do.
Cool. Thanks, Anna. Yeah. So this evening, I didn't write it. Oh, there, I did write it down. Thank goodness. We're discussing a couple of things. One of the topics being mental incapacity and sort of the legal sort of issues that can come of that, right? So I suppose we've had a case at ARC where I'm gonna start off with this using this as an intro to our conversation. So we had a case where a patient came in. Okay, he was diagnosed with all sorts of there were cognitive things, and there were psychiatric issues, and there was a lot going on, and the guy wasn't well, and his parents wanted to get involved and have him sort of medically boarded and shipped off to like a psychiatric facility for 6 months or whatever the case, right?
Yeah.
And his wife wasn't too keen on all of that, so she had a different idea of what needed to happen, and she had a different idea in terms of what sort of care he needed and that kind of thing, and she was more willing to take that on. But there was a big dispute about all of this. Can you maybe give us some insight into what sort of the legal sort of like who gets the rights and all the rest of it?
No, definitely we can. So I think some way to start when we're looking at mental incapacity or sort of just the mental faculties of a person is we first look at sort of the law. When we look at the law related to that person, is that every major in South Africa has a right to sort of make their own decisions. We can't, when we're looking at sort of sending someone for sort of a mental health assessment or mental care, or we can't, we automatically can't do that without their consent, whether they're mentally incapacitated or not. We need that consent. Something that then becomes the issue, and I'm sure this is what would have come prevalent in this case, is what happens when that person can't consent. They're just incapable of understanding.
Can I just interrupt you? Sorry, Sophia, yeah. I see you asking for the link. I've just posted it in the Mario Cafe. So if you want to hop on into the studio, Sophia, you're welcome to do that. But for now, we're going to just really take questions from the comments, and we'll see how things go. I just wanted to quickly say as well, we are broadcasting to the different public channels. Normally we broadcast for 10 to 20 minutes, and then we switch over to the private Mario Cafe group. But I think this is going to be a really interesting topic, so we're going to let it run for a little bit longer on the public channels. Sorry to interrupt you, Sana.
No, don't stress about it. So where I was at, I think, and like I said, something that maybe then have become prevalent in that matter that you were dealing with is what happens when that person can't or doesn't understand sort of where they, what they're doing or what they're consenting to. And that's obviously when you need someone else to then take over and say, well, this is where you should go, or this is what you should do. And I think the issue then is, who then has that say? Who then can say, okay, well, you should go follow this treatment, or you should be admitted here, you should be admitted there. And ultimately, if we come down to it, it actually comes down to the healthcare professionals. in that instance. What would then have to happen is, if the parents wanted to do that, they would then have to bring application, if this is the route they wanted to go, to have someone sort of forced into a mental facility, or sent to a psychiatric ward, wherever, is they would then have to make application to that specific facility, sort of motivated and saying, well, this is why we believe this person should be admitted here, and on this basis, and this is what's happened. What then follows from that, in terms of, if we're looking at the Mental Health Care Act, is there must be an assessment done of that person by two separate healthcare professionals. And based on that assessment and a report that's then done, that then gets sent to the head of that healthcare facility, where then a decision is then made, what is the best. And I think obviously, family ties, you want to do what you can, what's best for your spouse or your child, your father, your brother, whoever it may be. But ultimately, not being a professional, you may not know what's best. And that's when we need to then turn to the healthcare professionals.
Yeah. So, so this is different from a Section 33 in terms of the 2008 Substance Abuse and whatever Act. It's a long name.
Yes.
I don't recall it right now, but that Section 33 is a bit of a lengthy process. So that's where a social worker gets involved, and you obviously get a lawyer involved, and the person gets dragged off to court, and it's not necessarily based on incapacity. It's more based around sort of are they a danger to themselves and others?
Yes.
So that's specific reference to that, and that applies to most rehabs, right? I think what you're referring to is more the psychiatric sort of the psychiatric process, which I think is a lot more of a quicker, more efficient and sort of fast moving process, right?
Yeah, look, it can be, and again, it also, those types of applications, when we're looking at the psychiatric aspect of it, one of the first things that they look at is, if I'm going to submit you to involuntary care, regardless of what it is, one of the things you need to look at first is, are you a danger to yourself? Is there a risk of you doing something, for example, wanting to commit suicide, that kind of thing, or are you just going to harm yourself or harm others based on whatever's happened, and whether that's sort of the psychiatric aspect of it, or even just if we're looking at sort of the drug and alcohol abuse and other sort of issues that may arise. There's still that process. Yes, the psychiatric aspect of it is maybe a bit quicker if we're saying, well, we've got to go have these assessments. But also those assessments do take time. So there's still that lengthy process that goes involved. And at the same time, you've now still got this infighting between your family members.
Well, I suppose it would depend on how sort of competent the psychiatrist or the medical professional that's involved is, or how motivated they are to sort of get this done quickly or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so before we started, so look, that, I think, and once you're in the psychiatric facility, and there's been two psychiatrists or two healthcare professionals that have said, well, cool, this person's a danger to themselves. They've signed all the documents. The wife's got off to the police station, had it stamped and sealed. Once a person's in, if they do have resources or access to their own legal team.
Yes.
It's still difficult. It's still incredibly difficult. I mean, I think mostly people don't necessarily spend longer than, well, it depends, but I think, if the person's committed involuntarily for a 3-week period, to fight that is going to take longer than 3 weeks, right?
No, definitely. Look, it's definitely going to take longer than that, because the process for that is, we then need to go to sort of review board, and we need to do all those processes, then follow from that, and then give reasons why. And a difficult aspect of that is to now say, well, you shouldn't be committed for 3 weeks. You've now got two professionals that say, well, you should. And now you've got to somehow find a third, fourth independent, someone to come in, and willing to come and do an assessment, and then sort of make an opposite diagnosis.
Yeah,
and that's why, and that's why part of this process is there's that review board, and every so often that has to get reviewed, and those decisions, and obviously, and that's why I think, not necessarily the sort of the psychiatric side of it, but also the substance abuse side of it is always an ongoing assessment. I don't think it's just a once-off assessment, and that's it. The only time we're really looking at a once-off assessment is when we're looking at doing a more sort of serious sort of taking over of someone, let's call it their free will if we want, is when we're looking at appointing a curator.
Okay. Sorry, could you just say that again?
So obviously, when we're looking at your involuntary sort of forced stay in a rehab or a psychiatric ward, or where we're looking at, it's an ongoing assessment. It's always ongoing, and there's always going to be those reviews that are going to happen periodically.
Yeah.
When we're looking at something more serious, we're saying, well, that person, as a result of substance abuse or as a result of an accident, or just sort of old age, things like Alzheimer's, dementia, that kind of stuff. We then want to sort of take a more serious approach in managing that person, whether it's their money or their actual lifestyle. We then look at appointing a curator. That's sort of a more lengthy court process that gets done. But again, that's also sort of a once-off assessment, and then once the court has found that you're mentally incapable of managing your own affairs, a curator gets appointed, and that at one point in time, and if you have sort of a lucid moment, you could challenge it again, but then again, you've got to go for further psychiatric testings and diagnoses.
Tanner, something that just comes to mind. I mean, I think this is all very scary kind of stuff, right? Because number one, I think once you're caught up in that process, it's difficult to fight it. But I think something that comes to mind is this kind of stuff open to serious abuses? I mean, there was that movie, I don't know if you've seen it, where this lady sort of in the States made a profession out of, being a curator for people that are mentally incapacitated. And she, the whole movie was around her sort of ripping them off and selling their assets and things like that.
No, definitely. I mean, I think anything can be open for abuse. It all depends on the person. But that's definitely the case. And I think something that maybe not sort of from a professional standpoint, if that's sort of the way you wanted to act, and you made a living on being appointed as a curator, then that's when you could definitely do that. Because once you're appointed as a curator, you ultimately, obviously, in terms of it's slightly different here. We've got 3 sorts of different types of curators here, depending on your needs. We've got a curator that's appointed that's purely just for your legal aspects, entering contracts, litigating on your behalf. Then we've got a curator that basically the court allows to manage your monetary affairs. So they can look at your bank accounts, they can sort of give you an allowance if you want to go and spend money. And that sort of curator in terms of your monetary affairs can happen to anyone, even someone with a gambling addiction, for example. You could, as a family member, you could apply to court and say, well, my sister or my brother, my spouse, my father, whoever, they've got a gambling addiction, for example, and they can't manage their own affairs. So we need to appoint a curator. And again, you have to still go for those psychiatric assessments, and the court will order them to say, okay, well, we're going to appoint a curator bonus to go and manage your affairs. And you then have no control over your monetary amounts.
Yeah.
And then the last sort of curator we've got is a curator ad personam, who then just makes, that's the last one, makes his decisions on your living lifestyles. If you should go live in a mental health facility, or if you need to go to assisted living, sort of your elderly.
So we got a comment from Sophia. Insurance companies generally for medical boarding, especially for mental health, want an assessment every 3 months at first, and then move over to 6 months. So ties in with what you mentioned about ongoing assessments. And we got a hello from Fluffy Wobkins on. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Fluffy, and Eugene. Hi, Eugene. Thanks for watching, guys. So that's okay. So so it's I think it's again it's quite scary. I think if somebody the thing that scares me about it is that it's open to abuse, and I think the term is judicial abuse. Somebody, and we spoke earlier about the Megapint guy. What's his name? Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp, yeah.
And they mentioned the psychologist. I remember when she was on the stand, she was on Johnny Depp's team. She mentioned that, and I don't know how true this is. But she said that people with borderline personality disorder generally, they generally abuse judicial processes and things like that. And I've seen it. I've seen that happen. I've seen people go through it, go to the courts and get court orders for things that never happened, and it's clear and blatant abuse and all the rest of it in the system. But the system needs to follow the process, and the person gets arrested and sort of goes through the, through the whole process. So, for me, it just, you got to have your eyes. You got to have your eyes open. You got to be prepared for that kind of thing, because again, it can happen. Like you said, abuse can happen anywhere.
No, definitely, and I think with that and sort of that taking that abuse, it's definitely open for abuse in that regard. Where we've got, we see it all too often where we get clients that come in and they've got charges against them, whether civil or criminal, and you now have to defend it, and whether how true those charges are, or and this, even for example, if we're looking at if we go back to the creator application, you've got someone here that maybe was involved in an accident and sort of has some issues with short-term memory loss, for example. And you've then got spouses that then want to say, okay, well, I'm gonna, or family members who want to take advantage of that, and then sort of bring these applications to put you in assisted living, or a mental facility to manage your affairs, and they want to appoint themselves as the creators to manage your affairs. I've seen it. I had a matter several years ago where that was happening, where family members were trying to appoint, it was a brother, were trying to appoint a creator for their brother, and they were trying to appoint themselves as a creator to manage his affairs, basically saying that he was just spending money recklessly. And while they were bringing this application, they did exactly what I said earlier. They admitted him into a facility on the strength of their application, saying that he needs to be there. There were some cognitive sort of issues.
So they had evidence of that.
There were some cognitive issues, but it wasn't to an extent where you would say you needed assistance. He had lucid moments. Yes, he had moments where sort of wasn't sure, and maybe if we're looking at maybe onset Alzheimer's, if you want to go that serious, but I don't think it was. And obviously the healthcare professionals at that time, again, sort of then say, okay, well, we're going to admit him. And, also, I think we then look at the facility that we're in when you're talking about judicial sort of abuse, is we then look at the facility sometimes that people get put in, and those types, because obviously facilities, I mean, they're not going to do things for free either.
Yeah.
And that was one of the contentions in that specific matter that we raised, was that there were ties between the family members wanting to appoint a curator, and then that healthcare facility at the time.
Yeah.
And that's again, and then I think as the person on the inside, if we want to call it that, you're now stuck there, and you've got these people telling you that you need assistance.
Yeah. Thanks, Bobby. Hey, Bobby. Thanks for watching, man. Cool. Thanks for the comments. So, yeah, you're right, because if you're on a medical aid and you sort of section into a private facility, obviously once the medical aid benefits run out, no private facility is going to keep you. And I think the next step in that sort of case would be then a referral to a government facility. And that's scary, but somebody with resources. So, for example, I had a family member he's a wealthy guy. He's got resources and all the rest of it. And I can't imagine him. I can imagine him sort of, look, it's difficult.
No, it's difficult. And I think I saw a comment there. I don't know if it might have been from Bobby. So it's on my side, to his Facebook user, with more mental health care advocates needed, and definitely so. And I think, and unfortunately, that access, for someone that feels like they shouldn't be there, and now you've got people telling you that you can't, you're incapacitated, you can't look after your affairs, whereas you truly do believe that you can. And yes, and maybe you have moments where you can't sort of manage those affairs, or you do make sort of mistakes, or you have a lapse in memory. But yeah, we definitely need sort of a better route, if I can call it, for sort of looking after your capabilities with people you trust. And that's where I think, where a lot of people then get confused with it, especially family members that sort of try and take this abuse, is that those curators that are appointed in that instance aren't sort of just lay persons. They're usually advocates or attorneys that sort of have one. We've got our own governing.
So there's like an ethical,
and there's an ethical part of it. But again, when we're looking at just simply having someone committed for substance abuse, and like you're saying, once you're in, and you've only got those reviews, and those reviews aren't, it's not a weekly thing. It's a monthly, 3 months type of thing, where you've got to go for these continued reviews to the review board.
Have you seen these kinds of things in your years as an attorney? Have you sort of been through these processes?
It's for a curator. Look, I've sort of assisted it where we needed to. We had a recent case very recently where client came in, elderly lady, that just simply said, my bank account's been frozen. I'm elderly and I can't recall what my address was. Obviously having several addresses when you've now registered this bank account. And the question, and the first thing the bank says is go point to curator. And that application, one, it's not easy, and two, it's lengthy and it's costly. And in that instance, fortunately enough, we were able to assist in saying, okay, well, let's go to the bank. We'll go with you to the bank. We'll explain the situations that's happened, and we can.
So the reason I asked that question is because I don't see too many magistrates or judges or what's the guy that does the
master's office.
No, the lawyer the prosecutor. Sorry, geez.
The state prosecutor, yeah.
Yeah, so obviously prosecutors don't take kindly to. I mean, if they're going to prosecute, they're going to prosecute, right? But I don't see too many judges or magistrates taking too kindly to sort of any level of substance abuse. Or, well, I suppose they'd have to weigh up balance the scale.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, if we're going to court now and we're looking at substance abuse in court, again, that's a case by case sort of basis.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, Your Honor, listen, man, I got blackout drunk and I crashed the car, and now my family's trying to have me sectioned into a psychiatric facility or a rehab or whatever. There was just this one instance, so it's not like it happens every day. I mean, yeah. So you wouldn't necessarily just be like,
no. Look, I mean, and in that case, again, where we're looking at, if we're looking at criminal sanctions in that regard, obviously, and prosecutors saying, well, we should go, you should go to jail because you've crashed your car and you caused an accident. Something that is available to a person, and again, this is all with consent, is they can say, well, look, I'll go to a rehab center and I'll do a course on drinking, for example, or on substance abuse, and then the courts, once you're finished with that course, the courts then say to you, okay, well, you've done this thing now, don't do it again. And obviously, if you're a repeat offender, this is the fourth time the fourth time you've asked to go to a course, then the courts start looking at it a bit more seriously and saying, well, maybe we need to have some sort of other recourse, and not just sort of a rehab. Maybe we've got to go look at jail time.
Yeah. Jail time for a mental illness. Substance use disorder. It's a mental illness, right? It's in the DSM.
No, it is. Look, and what I mean by that is more in terms of,
sorry, man. So I was being. So what I'm saying is, like, look, obviously you can't use that kind of thing as a defense in like again, like you say, repeat offender, repeatedly crashing cars, hurting people, lands up in front of the judge and he uses, but I've got a mental disorder, substance use disorder. That's why this is happening.
Yeah, look. No, you can use it as a defense. Obviously, then we're looking at, and that's when we you're looking at, we can go talk back to the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, is we're then looking at, we're then looking at not just a sort of, I'm going to go do a month course and I'm going to go every second night on a course and, why I shouldn't be drinking and driving, or what's the effects of it, and what it can do. But then we're going more into the medical assessments, where we're now getting medical professionals involved to say, okay, you've actually got a mental disorder, and you shouldn't be on the streets or allowed. You should be in a facility for a lot longer period of time until such a stage is that you're sorted. And it's not just we're going onto a course. No. And then that's when the courts then do say, well, that I'm going to say to you, okay, you must go to a facility and you need to spend time in the facility.
Yeah. So Tanner, I wanted to touch base on, just before we do that, Sophia posted another comment here. Someone else having to look after you and basically have all control of your life is scary as hell. Having frontal lobe damage or bipolar, you have to learn to trust whoever is looking out for you and hope they have your best interests at heart. Sure.
No, and that must be a very scary thing. Because you're putting your life essentially, not just necessarily where you're living, but your money, and your abilities to enter into sort of any agreements. You want to rent a house, or you want to open a new bank account, for example. You can't do it yourself. You've got to go to someone else. And something where South Africa is sort of severely lacking, and there's been quite a lot of discussion about it, is where we're looking at power of attorneys and proxies. So in South Africa, you can have a power of attorney where I can, for yourself, if I trust you, I can say, Ryan, you've got power of attorney over me when it comes to medical decisions. So should I be in an accident, and I break my arm, for example, or I need to do, or I get sick, I'm ill and I need some sort of a treatment, and I'm refusing the treatment just because I'm being difficult. You as power of attorney, you can then go to the doctor and say, no, do this. Where South Africa lacks is when it comes to sort of mental incapacity. So where you've now been sort of diagnosed as having that mental incapacity, our laws are now saying to you that power of attorney then becomes invalid. It's null and void from now on, because you no longer have that appreciation for the power of attorney. So you no longer understand or appreciate what they're actually doing. So if I've broken my arm and I've given you power of attorney, you can tell the doctors, tell him to go and have his arm fixed. But if I'm diagnosed, for example, mentally, sort of and obviously going beyond some substance abuse, but if I'm diagnosed with mental incapacity, Alzheimer's, that kind of thing, you no longer have power anymore, even though you're a trusted family member. And I'm saying to you, Ryan, if this happens, you can put me here, or you can do this with me. You no longer have that power. Whereas a lot of other countries have established an enduring power of attorney, which basically allows someone that you trust and that you do trust, to then say, well, if I am declared mentally incapacitated for whatever reason, you can make these decisions. And that would then go again into what we were discussing earlier with family members wanting you to go to certain facilities or go for certain routes. We can bring it back to the beginning, is, if I did an enduring power of attorney with my spouse who I trusted, or with my parents, saying that, should this ever happen, you can have the decision of what should happen. And in that case, had a power of attorney been appointed and had our laws allowed for it, we would have then looked at the power of attorney and said, okay, well, the spouse has got power of attorney. She can decide what treatment I'm going to have.
So
and that's where we're lacking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this country is lacking in a lot of ways, if you ask me. Load shedding. So another place South Africa lacks is having someone that follows up on rehab requirements mentioned earlier. Yeah. Rehab requirements. Okay. So
I think they were mentioning sort of just those rehabs, some rehabs. I mean, I stand to be corrected, but that's something, where rehabs are then sort of taking advantage of people that are now in their rehabs. I mean, we look at a couple of years ago what happened with that healthcare scandal, where all the elderly people were then moved to hospitals and no one knew where they were. And we then look at that. And was that, and I think it, although an elderly, and you're looking at mental incapacity with elderly people anyway, I think that's maybe a part of old age, not necessarily for everyone. It's but I think generally it happens, and I think more so if someone is sort of declared mentally incapacitated for whatever reason, as a result of substance abuse, diseases, and that kind of thing.
So look, in this case here, where somebody is sectioned under Section 33 of that 2008 Act,
yes,
the rehab that they're sectioned into needs to have a valid registration and license, which sort of lapses every 5 years, so they have to repeatedly sort of apply for their license. And there are centers out there. There's a lot of these pop-up centers, mostly 12-step or sort of ultra-religious in nature, that sort of just pop up, and there's guys running rehabs out of their garages, which is horrifying, man. It's like, so just on that note, if anybody's thinking of looking at a rehab, make sure you look at the kind of whether they're registered, number one, look at their staff complement or who it is that are providing the services in the rehab center, and what their credentials are. If it's somebody that's sort of a recovering addict and they sort of just counseling somebody, they call themselves an addiction counselor without any real credentials. You watch out for that kind of stuff. So I got a WhatsApp message comment, which is unusual, from Megan. Thank you, Megan. Hi, Ryan. Great subject. I was wondering, what are the legal obligations when it comes to someone who's been in a home for several years with, say, dementia? They have a lucid time period sometimes before they are going. They have a lucid time period sometimes before they are going to pass, and they, of their own, want to go to their home, and the spouse or children and their spouse or children have moved on and now don't want said person to go home. What can the patient do? Regards, Megan. This could also apply to a person who's in rehab and wants to go home and believes they are recovered, but the family does not. So just if I could answer that, I think, again, that boils down to what the healthcare professionals say, right?
No, yeah, it will come down to those professionals in terms of dealing that. And in that scenario where we're talking about dementia, something we then need to look at is under what basis is that person in the facility? Are they there voluntarily? And if so, if they are voluntarily, then there's nothing stopping that person from leaving at any point, unless obviously we've now got an application from a healthcare professional that's sort of been looking after that person, or we've got applications from family members that are saying, no, but you should stay here. This is why we say you should stay here. If that person is in a facility because they've had a curator appointed and the curator's determined this is where you need to be, then that's obviously, then we need to go to that curator and talk to the curator, and that person with the dementia then needs to go and have those discussions with the curator and say, well, this is what I want to do. I don't have much longer. I prefer to be here, type of thing. And unfortunately, and again, this is where we go down to this, a scary thing is that you as that person, you ultimately don't have the say. Yes, you can go and you can make court applications, but once you've been declared mentally incapacitated due to dementia, and you've now all of a sudden got a lucid moment, you need to go and show the court that you're actually lucid now. You've got, you're no longer suffering from this dementia. You've got to get professionals involved, and it's not an easy. It's not cost. It's not cheap. It's expensive, and it takes some time.
My experience is the minute you've sort of, and this is my own personal experience, but I think the minute you've been personally kind of like branded, with a mental health condition, it's difficult to convince anybody, whether they be you're gonna have to, if you find somebody in Cape Town and they came back and they came to Joburg and they got the notes handed over from the previous psychiatrist, they're not going to want to step on the previous psychiatrist's toes necessarily. Like the Johnny Depp case, these healthcare professionals came across in a lot of ways like hired guns, right? In the sense that they were really sort of representing in a biased kind of way. But I think that kind of stuff, the states, it's I don't think the court in South Africa would tolerate that kind of thing.
They do in a sense,
I don't think if we're looking at professionals in this country would necessarily sort of go to the extremes that they did. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Yeah, and the courts maybe, but yeah, I can see where the thought. Sorry.
I think it all comes down to and again the type of person that we sort of pointing. If you want to find some healthcare professional out there that no matter what somebody else has to say, if you want them to agree with you, and we can go look at this dementia aspect. If you wanted to find someone out there that says you're no longer suffering with dementia, I'm sure you could find that person. And that's where we then in the courts we then end up with arguments between the experts. One expert saying this and one expert saying that, and we saw that in the Johnny Depp trial. One expert is saying something else, and the other one's saying something completely different. And then it all comes down to although we've got the experts that are giving evidence, it also comes down to all the other evidence that surrounds it, and then also the credentials and the credibility of those experts within their field. If for example, now you're talking earlier about the people that to say that they're addiction recovery advisors, for example, counselors. Sorry, and we've got someone that's saying that they've got no credentials, and he's saying you're no longer suffering from dementia, or you don't have a drinking problem, or you don't have a gambling problem, and you should be allowed to do what you want to do. But you've now got an expert that comes in that's got the credentials and got years of experience and says, well, actually, you do.
So in this country, when it comes mostly to rehab sectioning and things like that, that sort of falls into this landscape of social workers.
Yes.
And obviously where I suppose where dementia and psychiatric disorders, obviously psychiatrists and I'm assuming neurologists.
No, definitely neurologists as well.
Yeah.
I mean, social workers as well. I mean, you've got social workers, and again, it also comes down to when we're going into court specifically. We then start looking at your expertise and your credibility and your experiences. If you've got a junior social worker that's just finished studying versus someone that's been doing it for 20 years, who are you more likely to believe? And unfortunately, once you're sort of in the system, like you're saying, to get anyone else to believe that you're not, it is difficult, and your life is now sort of in the hands of people that you hope would have your best interest at heart and not necessarily just sort of leave you be.
I'm gonna go off topic quickly, man. So that real estate mogul that was he was sentenced to I don't know how many years, but he was from Cape Town and he murdered his wife at this guest house. Remember that story, right?
Yes.
So to me it sounded like all of the evidence in that case was all circumstantial. So there was no like smoking gun, right? Where there was like, so one expert said the bones were crushed because of the way he strangled her, and another expert said no, that's because of a rope that was positioned in this way, or the cord, or whatever it was, and it all sounded like circumstantial. And so my question is and I was wondering about this because I would think if you had to go to court and you were innocent and everything looked it looked really bad, but you were innocent, does it come down to can a decision about somebody going to jail for the rest of their lives come down to just the judge believing you or not? Is that how that works?
In South Africa, that's how it works. Obviously, we look at, and we're going to go back to again because it's sort of fresh in everyone's minds, is the Johnny Depp trial. We've then got a jury. We've got a jury of 7 people that sort of deliberate with each other, and sometimes there we go. Sometimes those deliberations are quick because everyone's sort of on the same page and they're believing one story or the other. And sometimes, they don't. And in South Africa, we've got the appeal process, but ultimately we've got one judge, one magistrate when we first hear in these matters who makes these decisions. And unfortunately, it does happen where, sometimes decisions, and I don't want to speak ill of any of my colleagues or judges, but sometimes it does happen where you interpret, and that it really comes down to interpretation. Is you interpret the evidence that's before you in a certain way. If we're looking at,
and I don't want to sort of give away too much of my. Well, I'm going to now give away my opinion on these. But there was that other guy that Van Breda who the murderer dude. Also kind of like all circumstantial, and he had this story that some guy, and it was just like, okay, well, the story is unbelievable. We don't believe the story. You are guilty because you were there. We don't believe the story. And then there was obviously the very famous Oscar Pistorius, right? Listen, I've woken up at night. I swear, I've woken up on a number of occasions, and my wife has been in the toilet, and I did not know it. I swear that's happened so many times. So I don't know if I would shoot, or I don't own a gun, but. Anyway,
look, and that's also that. I mean, there we're looking at sort of different elements of our law that all then sort of play together. But when we come down to the evidence, it's not just, and that's something that people aren't always privy to when we're reading these things afterwards, or we're just getting snippets from the news. Is a lot of how judges sort of interpret the evidence before them is also how people sort of answer their questions and present their questions.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I think you're 100% right. Like if you look at Amber Heard, the way we're digressing, like seriously here though, but if you look at the way she represented herself in court, right? Look, if she was diagnosed with something, right, and it looked to me like there was something wrong with her. Okay, in the way that she was answering her questions. Look, she was definitely dodging, ducking, and diving 100%. You know, like conflating those two words. Yeah, so that was happening, but I also feel like there's a part of me that feels like maybe she was kind of being sincere about the abuse, and I can imagine that kind of abuse happening. It was like a mutually abusive thing, right? But she got roasted because of the way she presented herself. I think, yes, the dishonesty played a role, but it was also the way she you know, her facial expressions. It was weird.
No, and it does, and it really does. You know, we have cases where, you know, we think we've got brilliant cases. You know, and we think we've got a solid case, and we put a witness on the box, and although they're being honest, you know, they sort of either, you know, they come across, you know, too fair. You know, you ask them a question, they say, well, I can't deny it. You know, but at the same time, they're saying, well, I don't think it's true, but I also can't deny that. Or you've got someone that, you know, tells a story, and then 5 minutes later, when they get asked a very similar question, tells the same story, but, you know, maybe a little bit extra, or this changed, or, you know, this little detail changed. And that's when we start then looking at the believability of everything.
If I've got a case coming up, a civil case where I'm suing somebody for example, screwing my kitchen up, can that person bring my mental health history, should they have any kind of knowledge of it, into that equation?
Look, I mean, I think unfortunately, sort of everything when we're in court is sort of fair game. But that's when we then rely on our, obviously your attorneys and your advocates in that instance to then deal with that. And obviously that's why going into these things, it's important to be open and honest with your attorneys when you're dealing with these things. To say, look, these are all the issues. This is all the sort of skeletons in the closet, if we can put it that way. Will it have an impact? I don't necessarily think so. But again, it all depends on the situation. You know, if we're looking at if we're looking at now with what you're saying, is that, you know, they've messed up your kitchen.
How does my mental health play into that?
Exactly that. You know, we're then going to look at photographs, and we're going to look at, you know, what were they meant to do, what should they've done, you know, and how does, you know, your mental health doesn't really affect that. You know, whereas you know, if we're looking at something different, where, you know, you're suing someone because they you know, they said something about you, sort of defamation. You know, we can maybe then, you know, that sort of plays a part in it. You know, how was that handled? How was a specific situation handled? And maybe that plays a bit more part of it. Not necessarily, it's probably a bad example, but, you know, that does sort of then maybe play a part. Yeah.
So, okay, cool. We've got a couple of minutes left, Tanner. So I wanted to just touch on the issue around children, right? And the mental incapacity, and particularly around substance abuse, right? So excuse me, hypothetical case, you've got one of the parents who is using drugs and alcohol actively, right?
Yes.
The other parent is not. They're fine, okay? The grandparents decide that they want the children removed from that situation, but the other parent is a competent parent. They, you know, they just don't want the family unit to be split up and so on, right? How much, and I know again that you're going to say it depends on a lot, but how much legal standing do the grandparents have in that scenario?
Look, the grandparents, and, you know, paternal grandparents, they've ultimately, where a parent can't provide for their children, whether single parent, both parents, you know, then the paternal grandparents then have that duty to look after their kids. Grandparents can always try and bring an application. We see it often where, I'm going to digress a little bit, we see it often where parents in general who don't even have sort of any sort of issues, you know, drug, substance related, where there's just a disagreement between the family, and the parents then say, well, you know, you can't see your grandchild. And we see it also often where then applications are then brought by the grandparents to let them have contact with the minor children. And the court's first thing, and you're going to hear it all too often, is they're going to say, well, what's the best interest of the minor children? What do we need to do? And in that situation where, you do brought up where one parent is using drugs and the other parent isn't, it all comes down to the substance abuse itself and those tests. Is it significant to such an extent that it's negatively impacting the minor children? Or is it sort of just
like the guy's getting drunk and passing out and not hurting anyone? Yeah.
Like that, or are we sitting somewhere and if this on one Friday night I happened to have too many and I drove my car and I crashed it because I was drunk, or we're looking at sort of children are at home and I'm drinking and maybe not necessarily abusing the children, but abusing the children, or
driving around with them drunk.
Driving around with them drunk, or sort of, or you've got substances at home and, letting your children see the substances and be around the substances and that kind of thing. And it all comes down also, like I said, to the best interest of minor children. And again, then we go and we turn back to the medical professionals. In this case, we're then looking at more clinical psychologists that then go and do assessments on the minor children and on the parents, and then we're then looking at the impact of those. Yeah. And the social workers, obviously social workers normally the first port of call, and the clinical psychologists, the private ones can get expensive and it's quite costly. But then that's when we're then looking at that and we're saying, okay, well, based on that report, and we turn back to the experts, based on that report, the judges then go and they say, okay, well, this social worker said that the child, these children or the child will benefit more so from having the grandparents in their life versus having the parents, and then the courts take that into consideration. Ultimately, there's always going to be a preference on the parents over the grandparents. Look over the minor children, especially where, and we can turn back to the rehabs. If that parent that's sort of suffering from the substance abuse has now said, okay, well, I'm on a course. Yes, I have a problem, but I'm doing what I need to do to sort it out. Then it's not likely that the courts will then say, okay, well, we're going to take the children away from you. And what usually happens in that situation is the grandparents, although even if the children are taken away, is the grandparents don't necessarily have ultimate control, or for life. Sometimes the courts then say, okay, well, the minor children for the time being might be better for the grandparents, and sort of provisionally. And once you finish your course and you're on a rehab, come back 2 months' time and go have another assessment, and on that basis, the new assessment, we then make a different determination. And if it's short of a short period of time, it might just go straight back to normal. Let's say it's been years, 5-10 years, where your children have been taken away from you 5-10 years, and you've now gotten the help over those period of time, and you want to see your kids again. The courts aren't going to readily say, okay, well, have your kids straight back right now. No, but it'll be phased in. And you as a parent, you're sort of always going to have that right to want to try and see your children, unless obviously something so significant happens that the courts completely take it away from you. So that's only really sort of adoption, but
the family court process is relatively quick, I think. But litigation in general, because that's litigation, right? It's like you ending up in court. Like it's lengthy and it's expensive. And I think by the time people sort of end up on your doorstep, they've generally, as with people that land up at the rehab's doorstep, they've been through a rough time, and it's like it's gotten to a very bad point. Yeah.
No, definitely. I mean, I don't think anyone goes to an attorney because they're having a good time.
Yeah.
And in terms of going to family courts, I mean, definitely you can go to family courts without an attorney. That's the whole point of the family courts and the children's courts. Is you can approach them without the need of an attorney to assist you, and that's obviously for them to be there for you and to go, where they appoint social workers and do all of that stuff. The nice part with having attorneys is, sort of because we're dealing with this sort of more on a daily basis, and day-to-day basis, is, we understand it a bit more. We understand the inner workings of the court and the family court. And saying, well, yes, let's go to family court, but this is how we can sort of maybe streamline it, or these are the processes that need to be followed, and we can maybe, in as much as we can, sort of assist with making that sort of a more sort of speedily process.
Yeah. Cool. Tanner, thank you very much. I think this has been very informative for me, and I think for our viewers, Fluffy Wubkins, thank you. Eugene McDonald, thank you. Dylan, Ashley, thanks for watching. Bobby, Sophia, who else was watching? I saw they were like quite a popular dude. They were like, but so Tanner, thanks very much, man. I appreciate it. See, any closing thoughts you want to leave the viewers with?
I think when we're looking at sort of these things, it's always best, seek the advice you need to seek before sort of making these decisions, in terms of, do I want to make an application, or do I need to go and sort of go into a facility? And if you do have family members that are sort of struggling from it, unfortunately, it might be a bit of a lengthy process, but there are ways in which we can try and deal with these situations. It's just, it is a scary thing, especially once you're in the system. Yeah. We just need to, and like Sophia said, we probably do need some more people out there. Sorry, it wasn't Sophia, I think it was Bobby. I said we probably do need some more people out there, sort of advocating for people that are in these situations that don't necessarily maybe need to be in them. Yeah. It's all complicated and difficult and case by case, I suppose, and everything and definitely. And I think with these situations where, with mental faculties ranging from not severe to totally severe, it's all different. And I don't think every person is the same. And unfortunately, there isn't although we've got laws that sort of govern a general, this is how we need to handle things. I don't think, unfortunately, we can't apply that sort of steadfastly to each and every situation. We need to sort of, in a way, be flexible, not flexible with the law, but flexible in the way of how we approach and how we deal with these things. Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Tanner. Thanks very much for taking the time to do this. All right, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, really appreciate it. Cool. So I'm going to play the outro, and then I'll see you on the other side of that. Perfect. Cool. Where's the outro? Oh, God. Okay, there it is. Cheers, guys. Cheers.